Julie Malloy stepped into the waterfront restaurant with aching feet and a smile she had earned the hard way. 12 hours at the hospital had drained every ounce of energy from her body, but she still felt excited. Daron had mentioned a lunch meeting near the Harbor District earlier that week. He never expected to see her here. She thought surprising him would give them something they had not shared in a long time. An ordinary hour together, a simple meal. A reminder that they were still a married couple, fighting through hard times side by side. The restaurant buzzed with conversations from professionals taking midday breaks. Plates clinked. Waiters moved quickly between crowded tables. Julie adjusted the strap of her work bag and scanned the room. Then she heard a familiar laugh. Darren. Her smile widened. She started walking toward the sound. A few steps later, she heard her own name. Julie stopped immediately. The sound came from a private seating area near the back. Without thinking, she moved beside a decorative divider separating the main dining room from the private section. The voices became clearer. Darren was sitting with two women. Both appeared relaxed, comfortable, familiar with him. Julie frowned slightly. Maybe clients, maybe business contacts. That explanation lasted only seconds. One of the women laughed. I still don't understand how you afford all this. Darren chuckled. Afford what? The trips, the golf weekends, the restaurants, the gifts. The second woman shook her head. You always talk about financial problems, but you're living better than most people I know. More laughter followed. Julie waited for Darren to explain. Instead, she heard something that made her chest tighten. It's actually pretty easy. The women leaned forward. What's the secret? One asked. Darren raised his glass. I married the secret. The women laughed. Julie didn't. Her fingers slowly tightened around the strap of her bag. What does your wife think about all this? One woman asked. Darren smirked. Julie doesn't know half of it. The table erupted again. Julie remained motionless. Every instinct told her to leave. Every instinct told her she was hearing something she was never supposed to hear. Then Darren continued. I've got that woman working nonstop. One woman laughed so hard, she nearly spilled her drink. No way. Hospital job, consulting job, logistics job. Each word struck harder than the last. Julie felt heat rising into her face. For 6 years, she had carried that workload. For 6 years, she had convinced herself the sacrifice was temporary. For 6 years, she believed she was helping her husband survive a financial disaster. Meanwhile, Darren sat comfortably discussing her life as if it were a joke. So, she's paying for everything? Another woman asked. Most of it. The women stared at him. She never questions it? Not really. More laughter. Then came the sentence that destroyed 6 years of trust. One woman smiled and said, That sounds less like a wife and more like an employee. Darren leaned back in his chair. No, he laughed. More like my personal slave. The entire table exploded with laughter. Julie felt the floor disappear beneath her. 6 years, 3 jobs, missed holidays, canceled vacations, exhaustion, stress, sleepless nights. Every sacrifice she made flashed through her mind at once. Not partner, not wife, not teammate, personal slave. At that moment, something inside her broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, completely, because the deepest wound wasn't the insult. It was the realization that Darren enjoyed what he was doing. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't grateful. He wasn't struggling. He was proud. Julie slowly stepped away from the divider. Nobody noticed her. Nobody called her name. Nobody knew she had heard every word. She walked calmly through the restaurant, out the front door, across the parking lot, into her car. Only after closing the door did she allow herself to sit still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't call Darren. Instead, she stared through the windshield and replayed 6 years of promises, 6 years of emergencies, 6 years of debt, 6 years of explanations. For the first time, Julie stopped asking how she could help her husband. A different question entered her mind, a question she could no longer ignore. Where did all the money actually go? That single question was about to expose hidden accounts, multiple lies, financial fraud, and a secret life Darren believed would remain buried forever. Welcome to Will and Rise Stories. To every single person listening right now, thank you for being here. This channel is growing because of people like you who truly love emotional, unforgettable storytelling. Please support the channel by subscribing. Julie Malloy's alarm rang at 4:30 every morning. Most days she was already awake before it sounded. 6 years of pressure had trained her body to move before sunrise. She got out of bed quietly, walked into the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and opened her laptop while packing meals for the day. Every morning followed the same pattern. Check emails, review schedules, answer urgent messages, prepare for work, leave the house before most people were awake. By 5:30, she was already heading toward the hospital. The first job paid most of the household bills. The second job helped cover expenses connected to Darren's business debt. The third job provided extra money whenever another financial emergency appeared. Those emergencies never seemed to stop. Every time one debt disappeared, another appeared. Every time Julie thought they were finally making progress, something unexpected happened. At least that was what Darren always told her. Julie spent her days solving problems inside one of the largest hospital networks near Baltimore. Doctors depended on accurate information. Departments depended on organization. Patients depended on systems working correctly. Julie handled pressure well. That was one reason people trusted her. After finishing her hospital shift, she immediately switched to consulting work. The change wasn't glamorous. It was simply another computer screen, another list of assignments, another set of deadlines. Most evenings ended with logistics projects for a healthcare supply company. By the time she finished everything, the clock often showed 10 at night. Sometimes later, sleep became another task squeezed into an already crowded schedule. Friends stopped inviting her to events because she rarely had time. Weekends looked exactly like weekdays. Birthdays became ordinary work days. Holidays often meant overtime. Julie accepted all of it because she believed there was a purpose behind the sacrifice. One day, Darren's debt would disappear. One day, the pressure would end. One day, they would finally enjoy the life they had spent years chasing. That belief kept her moving, even when exhaustion settled into her bones, even when her shoulders ached, even when she could barely remember her last day off. On a Friday evening, Julie drove to her parents' house for dinner. Traffic delayed her. Work delayed her. Everything delayed her. She arrived almost an hour late. Yvette opened the door and immediately frowned. "You look tired." Julie smiled. "I'm fine." "You always say that." Julie kissed her mother's cheek and walked inside. The smell of dinner filled the house. For a moment she felt relaxed. Family dinners were one of the few traditions she still tried to protect. Everyone gathered around the table. Conversation started normally. Work, neighbors, local news. Then Calvin looked at Julie. "How's the debt situation?" Julie answered automatically, "Better than before." Calvin nodded. He had heard that answer many times. "How much better?" Julie hesitated. She didn't actually know. Darren usually handled the details. He simply told her what needed to be paid. She trusted him, so she paid it. Rochelle noticed the hesitation immediately. Her expression changed. "Do you know how much is left?" Julie looked down at her plate. "Not exactly." Rochelle folded her arms. "Julie, it's been 6 years." The room became uncomfortable. Yvette glanced toward Rochelle, hoping she would stop. She didn't. "How much debt did he have?" Julie sighed. "You know the business collapsed." "We know that." "So what's the problem?" Rochelle leaned forward. "The problem is, 6 years have passed, and nobody can explain where the finish line is." Julie felt irritation rising. "Darren is trying." Trying to do what? The question landed harder than Rochelle intended, because Julie wasn't completely sure how to answer. Darren always talked about meetings. Clients, investors, partnerships, opportunities, plans. Yet, there never seemed to be actual results. Only another setback, another expense, another reason more money was needed. Calvin studied his daughter carefully. "When was the last time he showed you the numbers?" Julie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She couldn't remember, not because she had forgotten, because it hadn't happened. The realization bothered her. Yvette quickly changed the subject before the conversation became an argument. The rest of dinner moved on, but Julie carried those questions home. Every mile of the drive felt longer than usual. By the time she reached the house, Duran was stretched comfortably across the couch watching television. A golf tournament played on the screen. A takeout container rested on the coffee table. Darren smiled when she walked inside. "Hey, babe." Julie kissed his cheek. "Long day. You work too much." Julie stared at him for a second. The statement almost made her laugh. She worked too much because she believed she was helping him survive. Instead, she simply sat down. Darren wrapped an arm around her. "Not much longer." Julie heard those words again. The same promise, the same reassurance, the same future that never seemed to arrive. For years she accepted it without question. Tonight was different, because Rochelle's questions were still sitting in the back of her mind, and for the first time, Julie found herself wondering something she had avoided for years. What if nobody actually knew where all the money was going? The following week looked exactly like every other week in Julie Malloy's life. Work started before sunrise. Work ended long after dark. The only difference was that Rochelle's questions refused to leave her mind. She kept hearing them while driving, while answering emails, while reviewing reports, while trying to fall asleep. 6 years. How much debt is left? What does Duran actually do? The questions followed her everywhere. Julie tried focusing on work instead. That usually helped. Unfortunately, her mind kept returning to the same place. By Wednesday afternoon, she met Tasha Freeman for coffee between shifts. It had become one of the few traditions they still maintained. Even if those meetings rarely lasted more than 30 minutes, Tasha took one look at Julie and shook her head. "You need rest." Julie laughed. "I need another 8 hours in every day." "No, you need a life." Julie smiled. "I'll get one eventually." Tasha stirred her coffee. "That's what you said 3 years ago." Julie couldn't argue with that, because it was true. 3 years ago, she believed the difficult period would end soon. Now she wasn't sure when it would end, or if it would end. Tasha studied her carefully. "Can I ask something?" Julie already knew where the conversation was heading. "It's about Darren." "Of course it's about Darren." Julie leaned back. "Go ahead." Tasha spoke plainly. "When was the last time he gave something up?" Julie frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what sacrifice is he making?" Julie opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Tasha continued. "You work 3 jobs." Julie remained quiet. "You miss weekends." Still quiet. "You miss holidays." Julie looked away. "You barely sleep." Tasha folded her arms. "So what exactly is Darren sacrificing?" The question landed harder than Julie expected, because she didn't have an answer, not a real one. Darren always talked about stress. He talked about pressure. He talked about rebuilding. He talked about future success. But actual sacrifices, Julie couldn't think of any. Tasha noticed immediately. "That's what scares me." Julie stared through the coffee shop window. People walked down the sidewalk carrying groceries and shopping bags. Normal routines. Normal lives. Normal marriages. Sometimes she wondered what that felt like. The thought made her uncomfortable, because questioning Duran felt wrong. For years she had defended him, supported him, believed him. Doubting him felt almost like betrayal, even when the doubts made sense. Tasha lowered her voice. "Have you ever looked at everything yourself?" Julie turned back. "What? The finances? Darren handles that?" "Exactly." Julie frowned. "Darren knows more about it than I do." Tasha shook her head. "That's not what I asked." The words lingered. Julie finished her coffee shortly afterward and headed back to work, but the conversation followed her. That evening, she returned home around 10. The house was empty. A text message waited on her phone. "Business dinner. Running late. Love you." Julie stared at the message. Business dinner. Darren seemed to have a lot of those lately. Meetings, networking events, investor conversations, client dinners, partnership discussions. There always seemed to be something. Yet somehow, None of those activities ever translated into visible progress. The debt remained. The pressure remained. The sacrifices remained. Julie walked into the kitchen. Several unpaid documents sat on the counter waiting for attention. She rubbed her forehead. For years she had been moving so fast that she never stopped to evaluate the situation. She simply kept solving problems. Whenever money was needed, she worked more. Whenever another obstacle appeared, she found a way around it. Whenever Duran promised improvement was coming, she believed him. Tonight, she found herself wondering why. Not because she thought Darren was lying. Not yet. Because she suddenly realized how little she actually knew. That realization bothered her. A lot. The next evening brought another uncomfortable conversation, this time with Calvin. Julie had stopped by her parents' house to drop off paperwork her father needed. Calvin invited her inside. They sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, they discussed ordinary things. Then Calvin looked directly at her. "Can I ask you something?" Julie smiled. "Everybody seems to be asking me things lately." Calvin smiled back. "Maybe there's a reason." Julie already knew where this was going. "Okay." Calvin spoke calmly. "Have you seen Darren's business records recently?" Julie immediately answered, "No." "When was the last time?" Julie searched her memory. Months, maybe longer. She wasn't sure. Calvin nodded slowly. "That's concerning." Julie crossed her arms. "You think he's hiding something?" "No." The answer surprised her. "No?" Calvin shook his head. "I think you don't know enough." Julie looked down. That statement felt harder to argue with, because it was true. She knew what Darren told her. She knew what Darren requested. She knew what Darren promised. But she didn't actually know the numbers. She didn't know the remaining debt. She didn't know the payment schedules. She didn't know the accounts. She didn't know the details. For the first time, that reality felt dangerous. Calvin leaned forward. "Trust is important." Julie nodded. "It is. But trust doesn't mean refusing to understand your own situation." Julie sat quietly, not angry, not defensive, just thinking. On the drive home, she replayed every conversation from the past week. Rochelle, Tasha, Calvin, different people, different personalities, different approaches, yet all three were pointing toward the same problem. Julie knew everything about her responsibilities. She knew almost nothing about Darren's. When she arrived home, Darren was sitting comfortably on the couch again, television on, food beside him, phone in his hand. He smiled. "Hey, babe." Julie smiled back, but something felt different now. Not because she had stopped loving him, because she had started noticing things. Things she ignored before, things she excused before, things she never questioned before. For the first time in 6 years, Julie wasn't just carrying the burden. She was examining it. And the more closely she looked, the less sense it seemed to make. By the end of the week, a thought had settled firmly into her mind. She still believed Darren. She still trusted Darren, but she no longer trusted the story. And that small crack was about to become something much bigger. 3 days later, Julie finished another 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders felt heavy. She still had consulting work waiting for her later that evening. Normally, she would have driven straight home. Instead, she decided to surprise Darren. Nothing complicated, just lunch, a chance to spend an hour together, a chance to remember what marriage felt like before debt took over their lives. Darren had mentioned a lunch meeting near the waterfront district earlier that week. Julie sent him a text before leaving the hospital. No response. That wasn't unusual. Darren often claimed he was busy with meetings. Julie smiled and continued driving. She imagined his reaction when he saw her. For the first time all week, she felt excited. The restaurant was crowded when she arrived. Business professionals filled most of the tables. Conversations blended together across the room. Julie scanned the dining area. Then she heard Darren laughing. The sound came from a private section toward the back. She immediately started walking in that direction. A few steps later, she heard her own name. Everything changed. Julie stopped. Instinct took over. She moved beside a divider separating the private area from the main dining room. The conversation became clear. Darren sat with Sydney and Charisma. At first, Julie assumed they were clients. That assumption disappeared quickly. The discussion wasn't about business. It was about money, his lifestyle, his spending. Julie listened as Sydney questioned how he managed to afford expensive trips, golf weekends, gifts and restaurants, while constantly talking about financial problems. Darren laughed. Then he admitted he had married the secret. The secret was Julie, the woman working herself into exhaustion while believing she was helping her husband escape debt. Julie felt her stomach tighten. Each sentence became harder to hear. Darren described her jobs: the hospital, the consulting work, the logistics projects, the sacrifices, the long hours, everything, not with appreciation, not with gratitude, with amusement. Sydney and Charisma laughed. Darren laughed louder. Then came the comment Julie would never forget. The comment that ended 6 years of trust. Personal slave. The words slammed into her harder than any argument ever could. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. At least honest enough to reveal how Darren truly viewed her. The woman carrying his burdens, the woman paying his bills, the woman sacrificing her life, the woman he mocked behind her back. Julie remained hidden. She heard enough, more than enough. Without making a sound, she turned around and walked away. Nobody noticed. Nobody followed her. Nobody knew she had been there. She crossed the parking lot and climbed into her car. For several minutes, she simply sat behind the steering wheel. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled, but she refused to cry. The pain was real. The humiliation was real. The betrayal was real. Yet another feeling was growing stronger. Clarity. For years, Julie had defended Darren. Every warning, every concern, every question. She always found a reason to protect him. Now those conversations returned one by one. Rochelle's questions, Tasha's concerns, Calvin's warnings. Everything suddenly fit together. The excuses, the missing answers, the endless emergencies, the constant need for more money. The pattern was impossible to ignore. By the time Julie started the engine, something inside her had changed. She wasn't looking for explanations anymore. She wasn't searching for excuses. She wasn't interested in another promise. She wanted facts. The drive home felt different. For 6 years, she had focused on helping Darren survive. Now she wanted to understand exactly what she had been helping. That evening, Darren returned home around 9. Julie was already sitting at the kitchen table. Her laptop remained open in front of her. Several work files covered the screen. From the outside, everything looked normal. Darren smiled when he walked inside. "Hey, babe." Julie looked up. For the first time, she saw him differently. Not the husband she believed he was. The husband he actually was. A man who laughed about her sacrifices. A man who benefited from her loyalty. A man who viewed her hard work as something he owned. Darren kissed her forehead. "Long day?" Julie forced a smile. "You could say that." He dropped onto a chair. "Mine too." The statement almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead, she nodded. Darren launched into another story about meetings, business opportunities, and future plans. Julie listened quietly. The difference was that she was finally paying attention, not to what he said, to what he avoided saying. Specific numbers never appeared. Specific results never appeared. Specific details never appeared. Only promises, only explanations, only another version of the future. When he finished talking, he stood up. Not much longer. There were those words again, the same words he had repeated for years. Julie watched him walk upstairs. A few moments later, she heard the shower running. She remained at the kitchen table, motionless, focused, determined. For years she had spent her energy helping Darren. Starting tonight, that was over. Julie opened a notebook. She picked up a pen. Across the top of the first page she wrote a single sentence: "Find out where the money went." Then she opened the first bank statement. What started as a search for answers was about to expose a secret life Darren never imagined could be uncovered. Julie opened the first bank statement before Darren came downstairs. She worked quickly. The notebook sat beside her laptop. A pen rested in her hand. For years she accepted whatever explanation Darren gave her. Tonight, she wanted numbers, real numbers. The first statement showed exactly what she expected. Mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, household expenses. Nothing unusual. Julie moved to the next statement. Then another, then another. Hours passed. The clock moved beyond midnight. She kept going. Years of paperwork stretched across the kitchen table. Bank statements, credit reports, payment records, tax documents, loan information, everything she could access. Julie had spent 6 years helping Darren manage debt. She assumed she understood the situation. The documents quickly proved otherwise. A pattern began appearing. At first, it seemed small. Then it became impossible to ignore. Several debts Darren regularly discussed were missing. Julie frowned. She opened another statement, then another. The same result appeared. Certain payments had stopped years earlier. Not months earlier. Years. She pulled out her notebook and started writing. Account number, balance, final payment, closure date. The list kept growing. By 2 a.m, Julie sat back in her chair. Her heart was beating faster. Something wasn't right. According to Darren, multiple debts were still active. According to the records, they were gone. Julie checked again. She wanted to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding something. She reviewed every document a second time. The numbers didn't change. The dates didn't change. The accounts remained closed. One debt had been eliminated nearly 3 years earlier. Another disappeared more than 2 years ago. A third account showed a zero balance. Julie stared at the screen. For years she believed she was working extra jobs to eliminate those exact obligations. Yet the records showed they had already been resolved. A cold feeling settled inside her chest. If those debts were gone, where had all her money been going? Julie kept digging. The answer didn't arrive immediately. Instead, she found more questions. Transfers, large transfers, recurring transfers, money moving out of accounts she recognized, money moving somewhere she didn't recognize. She zoomed in on one transaction, then another, thousands of dollars, every month, sometimes multiple times per month. Julie grabbed her notebook. She documented everything. Dates, amounts, destinations, patterns. The deeper she looked, the more concerned she became. This wasn't random spending. The transfers followed a system. The money was going somewhere specific, somewhere Darren never mentioned. Around 3 a.m, Julie finally closed her laptop. She needed sleep. Unfortunately, sleep didn't come easily. Questions filled her mind. She woke up exhausted and headed to the hospital. Throughout the day, she kept thinking about the documents. Every free moment brought another question. Every answer seemed to create 2 more. That evening, she returned home before Darren. She immediately reopened the records. This time she focused on timelines. She wanted to compare what Darren said with what the paperwork showed. The differences were shocking. Julie found messages from years earlier, emails, notes, payment discussions. Every time Darren requested extra money, he attached it to debt. Business debt, emergency debt, unexpected debt, temporary debt. The records told a different story. Many of those obligations had already been eliminated. Some had disappeared before Darren even requested additional help. Julie rubbed her forehead. The realization hit hard. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't poor communication. This was deception. For 6 years, she believed every extra shift was helping them escape a financial hole. Now she was looking at evidence suggesting the hole had already been filled. Yet her money kept disappearing. The next several nights followed the same routine. Work, home, documents, research, evidence. The kitchen table slowly transformed into an investigation center. Stacks of paperwork covered every surface. Julie organized everything carefully. One folder for debts, one folder for transfers, one folder for account activity. Every discovery pushed her closer to the truth. Late Friday night, she found something that made her stop typing. A transfer account. The destination appeared repeatedly throughout the records. The account number surfaced again and again. Thousands of dollars had moved through it. Julie searched for ownership information. The results weren't immediately available. But one thing became clear. The account had nothing to do with the debt she had been paying. Nothing. Julie looked down at the growing notebook. The evidence was becoming impossible to explain away. For years, she thought the problem was debt. Now she was beginning to suspect the debt had never been the real problem. The real problem was where the money went after the debt disappeared. And she had only started uncovering the truth. The following weekend, Julie continued digging through records. By now, she wasn't looking for mistakes. She was looking for answers. The debts Darren talked about for years had mostly disappeared. The paperwork proved it. Yet thousands of dollars continued leaving accounts every month. Julie wanted to know where those dollars went. Saturday morning, she spread documents across the kitchen table before Darren woke up. The house remained quiet upstairs. That gave her several hours to work. She followed the transfer trail she discovered the night before. One account led to another, then another. The pattern became clearer. Money wasn't being used to eliminate debt. Money was being redirected. Julie documented every movement carefully. By midday, she discovered something that made her stomach tighten. One transfer account connected to a financial profile she had never seen before. The profile contained activity far beyond normal household expenses: luxury hotel charges, golf resort reservations, high-end restaurants, designer stores, airline tickets, weekend travel. Julie stared at the transactions. Every charge carried a date. Every date carried a memory of her working, a memory of her missing something, a memory of her sacrificing another evening. While she worked extra hours, Darren spent money freely. The realization hurt, not because of the dollar amount, because she knew what it cost her to earn every dollar. Julie continued reviewing records. The spending never slowed, month after month, year after year. The same pattern repeated. The struggling businessman Darren described to everyone did not exist inside the records. The man inside the records lived comfortably, very comfortably. That evening, Darren returned home carrying takeout food. Julie quickly minimized her files. The investigation remained her secret. For now. Darren smiled. "Thought I'd bring dinner." Julie forced a smile. "Thanks." He launched into another conversation about business opportunities. Another possible investor, another promising deal, another future breakthrough. Julie listened while eating. What stood out wasn't what he said. It was how little evidence ever supported any of it. For years, she accepted these stories without question. Now she found herself mentally comparing every statement against the documents. The stories sounded weaker every day. The records sounded stronger. The next morning, Julie resumed her search. Several hours later, she found something worse than hidden spending: a credit account. Her name appeared on it. Julie frowned. She didn't recognize the account. She checked the opening date. Nothing looked familiar. She checked the application details. Still nothing. Julie pulled her personal records. The account wasn't listed anywhere she normally tracked finances. A cold feeling moved through her chest. She opened another report. Then another. The same problem appeared again. A second account, then a third. Julie sat frozen. She had never opened them, never applied for them, never approved them. Yet her information appeared throughout the records. Address, personal details, credit history, everything matched. The implications were impossible to ignore. This was no longer about dishonesty. This was something much larger. Julie immediately began gathering copies. Every document, every statement, every application record, nothing could be overlooked. She created an entirely new folder. Inside it, she placed every suspicious account connected to her identity. By late afternoon, the folder had become thick, far thicker than she expected. The more she reviewed, the worse the situation became. Several accounts carried significant balances. Others showed years of activity. Some connected directly to spending she knew nothing about. Luxury purchases, travel expenses, entertainment costs, charges she never authorized, charges she never benefited from, charges she never even knew existed. Julie leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the restaurant, fear entered the picture. Not fear of losing Darren, not fear of divorce, fear of what this could mean financially. Her name appeared everywhere. If problems surfaced, those accounts could affect her future, her credit, her savings, everything she worked for. The realization strengthened her determination. She could no longer afford assumptions. She needed facts. Every fact. That night, she opened a fresh page in her notebook. At the top, she wrote 3 categories: hidden accounts, unauthorized credit, luxury spending. The pages beneath filled quickly. Dates, balances, transactions, evidence, patterns. The notebook was becoming a roadmap of Darren's deception. By Monday evening, another discovery emerged. Several transactions connected different accounts together. Julie followed the chain carefully. What she found confirmed her growing suspicion. Darren wasn't managing money poorly. He was managing information. The entire system depended on one thing: keeping Julie unaware. As long as she believed the debt story, she never questioned where the money went. As long as she worked harder, he never needed answers. As long as she trusted him, the system continued. For 6 years, it worked perfectly. Now the system was breaking apart, one document at a time, one account at a time, one lie at a time. By the end of the week, Julie reached a conclusion she could no longer avoid. The problem was bigger than a bad marriage, bigger than cheating, bigger than broken promises. The records pointed toward something far more serious, something that required professional help. Because if the documents were telling the truth, Darren had spent years using her trust as a financial weapon, and Julie intended to find out exactly how far it went. By the time Julie finished reviewing the latest records, one fact was impossible to ignore. She could no longer handle this alone. The documents had already revealed closed debts, hidden transfers, luxury spending, and accounts connected to her identity. Every discovery raised the stakes. Every discovery created another risk. Julie needed someone who understood situations like this. The following Tuesday, she called Lorraine Beck. Rochelle had mentioned the attorney months earlier during a conversation Julie barely remembered. At the time, she never imagined needing legal advice. Now, everything was different. Lorraine scheduled a consultation for the next afternoon. Julie left work early and drove directly to the office. She carried a large folder filled with records, bank statements, credit reports, transfer histories, account information, years of financial activity. Lorraine greeted her professionally and invited her into a conference room. Julie placed the folder on the table. "This is what I've found so far." Lorraine opened the folder. The meeting began. For nearly an hour, Julie explained everything: the debt story, the restaurant conversation, the hidden spending, the secret accounts, the accounts connected to her name. Lorraine listened carefully. She interrupted only when clarification was necessary. As the documents piled higher, Lorraine's expression became more serious. Finally, she closed one file and looked directly at Julie. "How much of this does your husband know you've discovered?" "Nothing." "Good." Julie frowned. "Good?" Lorraine nodded. "Very good." Julie sat quietly. Lorraine continued. "Right now, information is your advantage." Julie listened carefully. "For years you've been operating without facts. Now you're finally getting facts. The last thing you want is for him to start changing records or creating explanations." The statement made sense. Julie thought about Darren's ability to talk his way through difficult situations. She had seen it for years. Every problem came with an explanation. Every concern came with reassurance. Every question came with another story. Lorraine pointed toward the documents. "These don't tell stories. These show evidence." Julie felt a strange sense of relief. For weeks, she had questioned herself, questioned her judgment, questioned her conclusions. Hearing a professional take the evidence seriously mattered. A lot. Lorraine opened another folder. "Have you saved copies of everything?" "Most of it." "Not most." Julie looked up. Lorraine's tone was firm. "Everything." Julie nodded. "I understand." "Multiple copies." Julie nodded again. "Digital copies, physical copies, organized copies." Lorraine began listing specific categories: account statements, credit reports, transfers, applications, tax documents, payment histories, communication records, anything connected to finances. Julie wrote everything down. The list filled several notebook pages. When the meeting ended, Lorraine leaned forward. "You need to keep collecting information." Julie immediately asked the question that had been bothering her. "Do you think it's as bad as it looks?" Lorraine took a moment before answering. "I think you've only seen part of it." The words stayed with Julie during the entire drive home. Part of it. That meant there could be more, much more. That evening she started following Lorraine's advice. The investigation became structured, professional, methodical. Every document received a category. Every category received a folder. Every folder received backups. Julie treated the process like a major project at work. Nothing would be misplaced. Nothing would be forgotten. Nothing would be overlooked. Days passed. Then another week. Julie continued working her jobs while secretly building the case. Darren noticed nothing. He continued living exactly as before. Business meetings, phone calls, dinner appointments, promises about future success, promises about financial recovery, promises Julie no longer believed. The difference now was that she stopped arguing internally. She stopped searching for excuses. She stopped trying to explain his behavior. The evidence spoke clearly. One Thursday evening, Darren sat across from her at dinner. He spent 20 minutes discussing a potential investor. According to his story, everything could change soon. Julie listened quietly. Inside her mind, she compared his words to the documents waiting upstairs. The contrast was impossible to ignore. For years she accepted promises. Now she trusted records. The records had never lied to her. Later that night, after Darren went to bed, Julie returned to her investigation. She reviewed another collection of financial documents. One discovery connected directly to a previous transfer. Another connected to a spending account. The puzzle was growing. Piece by piece, the picture was becoming clearer. Darren's life looked very different from the version he presented. Very different. The deeper Julie dug, the less she recognized the man she married. Yet she refused to rush. That was the most important lesson she had learned. If she confronted him now, she would only receive more stories, more excuses, more promises. She wanted something stronger than promises. She wanted truth, complete truth, nothing less. By the end of the month, the evidence filled multiple folders. The notebook contained dozens of pages. The timeline stretched across years. Patterns were emerging everywhere. Julie looked at the growing stack of documents and realized something important. The investigation was no longer about proving Darren lied. That part was already obvious. The investigation had become something bigger. She wanted to know exactly how much had been hidden, exactly how much had been taken, exactly how many years of her life had been built on falsehoods. And until she found every answer, Darren would never know that the woman he underestimated was quietly preparing for the truth that would change both of their lives forever. 2 weeks after meeting Lorraine, Julie attended a healthcare fundraising event connected to one of her employers. She almost didn't go. Work had been exhausting. The investigation consumed most of her free time. But attendance was encouraged, so she made herself go. The ballroom was filled with business leaders, healthcare professionals, donors, and community representatives. Julie spent most of the evening speaking with colleagues. Nothing unusual happened. Then she spotted a familiar face across the room. Sydney. Julie recognized her immediately. The same woman from the restaurant. The same woman who laughed at Darren's joke. For a moment, Julie considered walking away. Then she remembered what Lorraine said. Gather information. Learn the truth. Julie took a deep breath and approached. Hi. Sydney smiled politely. Hello. The conversation started naturally. Names, work, the event. Nothing uncomfortable. Several minutes passed before Darren's name entered the discussion. The change in Sydney's face was immediate. A smile appeared. Oh, you know Darren? Julie kept her expression neutral. Yes. Sydney laughed softly. Small world. Julie nodded. It is. Sydney seemed completely comfortable discussing him. That surprised Julie. She expected secrecy. Instead, she found openness. Darren talks about his business all the time. Julie listened carefully. What kind of business? Sydney repeated many of the same descriptions Julie had heard for years. investments, partnerships, consulting projects, expansion plans, future opportunities. The difference was what came next. Sydney smiled. Honestly, I feel bad for him. Julie remained calm. Why? He went through a rough marriage. Julie felt her chest tighten. A rough marriage? Sydney nodded immediately. That's what he told me. Julie said nothing. Sydney continued. He said the relationship ended years ago, emotionally. Julie kept listening. He said they stayed together because separating would create financial complications. Another lie. Sydney had no idea. She spoke with complete confidence. He told me they basically live separate lives. Julie looked directly at her. Really? Sydney nodded. According to him, they've been unhappy for a long time. Every sentence revealed another layer of deception. Darren wasn't simply hiding things. He was creating entirely different realities. Sydney continued talking. He said he felt trapped. Julie almost laughed. Trapped. The man who spent 6 years living off her labor described himself as trapped. Sydney had no reason to doubt him. She believed every word. The same way Julie once had. That realization changed how Julie viewed her. Sydney wasn't an enemy. Sydney wasn't the problem. Sydney was another person who had been manipulated. The conversation continued. The more Sydney shared, the clearer the picture became. Darren presented himself as a misunderstood businessman struggling through a failed marriage. He painted himself as the victim. He painted Julie as distant, unsupportive, emotionally unavailable. The complete opposite of reality. By the end of the discussion, Julie understood something important. Sydney didn't know the truth. Not even close. She didn't know Julie worked 3 jobs. She didn't know the debt story was false. She didn't know Darren still depended heavily on Julie's income. Most importantly, she didn't know Julie was standing right in front of her. The conversation ended politely. Sydney excused herself to greet another guest. Julie remained where she was. Her mind raced. The financial investigation had exposed hidden money. Now she was uncovering hidden identities. Darren wasn't maintaining one lie. He was maintaining entire fictional versions of himself. Different stories for different audiences. Different facts for different people. Different realities depending on who was listening. Julie left the event later that evening with a new realization. The financial records only revealed part of the truth. The people around Darren were revealing the rest. And for the first time, Julie wanted to know exactly what story he had told Charisma. Julie spent the next several days thinking about her conversation with Sydney. One fact stood out above everything else. Sydney genuinely believed Darren. The confidence in her voice had been real. The sympathy had been real. The concern had been real. She had no idea she was listening to lies. That realization pushed Julie to keep digging. A few days later, another opportunity appeared. While reviewing public posts connected to some of Darren's activities, Julie came across several photos from a charity event. One image immediately caught her attention. Darren and Charisma stood together, smiling for the camera. Julie already knew about the relationship. What caught her attention was the caption beneath the photograph. The caption described Darren as a successful entrepreneur and investor. Julie stared at it. Successful entrepreneur, investor. The description felt almost absurd. For years, she had been carrying most of the financial burden, while Darren presented himself to others as a thriving businessman. The more Julie looked, the more examples she found. Posts, comments, photos, mentions. A carefully constructed image, one that looked nothing like reality. Several days later, Julie finally met Charisma. The meeting happened through circumstances neither woman planned. Unlike Sydney, Charisma seemed more guarded at first. The conversation remained polite, professional, careful. Julie allowed the discussion to develop naturally. Eventually, Darren's name surfaced. The reaction was immediate. A smile appeared. "Darren's a good man." Julie heard those words and immediately understood she was about to hear another version of the story. She simply listened. Charisma spoke openly. "Darren has been through a lot." Julie nodded. "So I've heard." Charisma continued. "He carries a lot of responsibility." Julie almost smiled. Responsibility. That word had followed Darren everywhere, yet someone else always seemed to carry the actual burden. The conversation moved forward, piece by piece, lie by lie. A completely different version of Darren emerged. Sydney had been told he was trapped in a dead marriage. Charisma had been told something entirely different. According to Charisma, Darren remained married only because he wanted to avoid hurting Julie financially. Julie could hardly believe what she was hearing. In one story, he was the victim. In another story, he was the hero. The facts changed depending on the audience. The role changed depending on the audience. The truth changed depending on the audience. Everything revolved around making Darren look good. Julie kept listening. Charisma described conversations about future plans, future business growth, future investments, future opportunities. The promises sounded familiar, very familiar. Julie had heard many of them herself. The difference was that Darren adjusted the details for each person. What he told Julie wasn't what he told Sydney. What he told Sydney wasn't what he told Charisma. Every version served a different purpose. Every version created a different image. Charisma eventually mentioned an investment opportunity Darren had discussed. That immediately caught Julie's attention. What kind of investment? Charisma explained. The details sounded impressive. Large returns, strong growth, excellent prospects. Julie already knew enough to recognize the pattern. Promises, possibilities, future success, no proof, no results, no evidence. The same formula appeared again. Only the audience had changed. As the discussion continued, Charisma revealed something even more important. Darren carefully controlled information. Certain topics were always avoided. Specific questions never received direct answers. Conversations often shifted whenever details became necessary. Julie recognized the behavior instantly. She had experienced it herself for years. Only now she could see the full picture. Darren wasn't managing relationships. He was managing narratives. Each person received a customized version, a customized truth, a customized reality. The realization changed everything. This wasn't ordinary dishonesty. This required planning, effort, consistency, years of maintaining separate stories, years of keeping people separated from one another, years of making sure nobody compared information. By the end of the meeting, Julie felt more certain than ever. Sydney hadn't been given the truth. Charisma hadn't been given the truth. Julie hadn't been given the truth. All three women had been given different stories, different explanations, different versions of the same man. And for the first time, Julie realized something powerful. The moment those stories were placed side by side, Darren's entire world would begin falling apart. Because lies survive in isolation, they rarely survive comparison. And very soon, comparison was exactly what was about to happen. Julie didn't contact Sydney immediately. She didn't contact Charisma immediately. She spent several days reviewing everything she had learned. The financial records, the hidden accounts, the unauthorized credit lines, the stories Sydney told, the stories Charisma told. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. Every path led back to the same conclusion. Darren had spent years creating different realities for different people. The only reason those realities survived was because nobody compared notes. Julie decided that needed to change. She contacted Sydney first. The message was simple. She asked to meet privately. Sydney agreed. A few days later, they sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop. Sydney immediately noticed Julie's serious expression. "Is everything okay?" Julie looked directly at her. "No." Sydney's smile faded. Julie opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. At first, Sydney looked confused. Then she started reading. The confusion quickly disappeared. "What is this?" "Evidence." Sydney looked up. Julie continued. "You deserve to know who Darren really is." For the next hour, Julie carefully explained everything. The marriage, the debt story, the restaurant conversation, the hidden spending, the secret accounts. Sydney listened without interrupting. As more information surfaced, the color drained from her face. "He told me you were basically separated." "We weren't." "He said you barely spoke." "We lived together every day." "He said the marriage was over." It wasn't. Sydney looked back down at the documents. Shock turned into anger. Then embarrassment. Then disbelief. Every promise Darren made suddenly looked different. Every explanation sounded different. Every memory changed. When the meeting ended, Sydney leaned back in her chair. I can't believe this. Julie nodded. Neither could she. A few days later, Julie met Charisma. This conversation followed a similar path. The difference was Charisma arrived with questions of her own. She had already started noticing inconsistencies, small things, missing details, stories that didn't quite fit together. Julie filled in the missing pieces. Then she showed the evidence, account records, timelines, financial documents. Charisma reviewed everything carefully. The more she read, the quieter she became. Finally, she looked up. None of this matches what he told me. It doesn't match what he told Sydney either. Charisma frowned. What do you mean? That was the moment everything changed. Julie explained Sydney's version, then explained her own version. The differences were enormous. 3 women, 3 completely different stories. 1 man, 1 truth. For nearly 2 hours, they compared information, text messages, photos, dates, travel plans, conversations. The evidence grew rapidly. Every new detail exposed another lie. Every timeline revealed another contradiction. Patterns started appearing everywhere. Darren often scheduled overlapping commitments. He reused promises. He repeated future plans. He recycled business opportunities. Only the details changed. The core strategy remained the same: make people believe what benefited him. By the end of the week, all 3 women agreed to meet together. The meeting felt strange at first. Under different circumstances, they might never have spoken. Now they sat around the same table, comparing years of deception. Julie brought financial records. Sydney brought messages. Charisma brought screenshots. Within minutes, the table was covered. The evidence told a story Darren never expected anyone to assemble. A story built across years. A story spread across multiple relationships. A story held together by secrecy. The women worked through everything carefully. Dates were matched. Trips were matched. Promises were matched. The results were shocking. One weekend, Darren claimed he was attending a business event. The records showed luxury travel. Sydney received one explanation. Charisma received another. Julie received a third. The same pattern appeared repeatedly. Again, again, and again. Sydney eventually pulled out her phone. There is something else. She opened a conversation thread. Several messages appeared. Business opportunities, investment plans, future projects, large returns, big promises. Julie immediately recognized the language. She had heard versions of it for years. Charisma leaned closer. He sent me almost the same thing. She opened her own messages. The similarities were obvious. Different wording. Same objective. Same promises. Same fantasy. The women exchanged screenshots. The picture became even clearer. Darren wasn't simply lying about relationships. He was creating false expectations everywhere. Future wealth, future success, future opportunities. Always somewhere ahead. Always just out of reach. Always requiring trust. Julie looked at the growing pile of evidence. For years, she believed she was investigating financial misconduct. Now she understood something larger. The money was only part of the story. The real story was manipulation. Darren built his entire life around controlling information. As long as people stayed separated, his system worked. The moment people started communicating, the system collapsed. By the end of the meeting, nobody felt confused anymore. Nobody felt uncertain anymore. The facts were finally visible. Sydney looked at Julie. What happens now? Julie glanced at the evidence covering the table. Then she answered honestly, now we keep following the truth. For the first time since the restaurant, Julie felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not relief, not happiness, confidence. Because Darren still believed he controlled the situation. He still believed nobody knew the full story. He still believed his secrets were protected. He had no idea 3 women were now holding the pieces of a puzzle that exposed almost everything. And while Darren continued living as though nothing had changed, Another part of Julie's life was about to take an unexpected turn, one that had nothing to do with betrayal, one that would finally force her to see the value Darren never noticed. While Darren's world slowly moved toward disaster, something unexpected was happening in Julie's professional life. For years, she solved problems nobody else wanted. For years, she improved systems nobody else noticed. For years, she made difficult situations run smoothly without asking for credit. Most people simply assumed she was dependable. Very few realized how much value she created. Julie never complained. She never promoted herself. She finished the work and moved on. That habit followed her into every job she held. One Monday morning, Julie joined a virtual meeting for the healthcare logistics company. Several managers attended. Department leaders attended. Senior executives attended. The discussion focused on supply shortages affecting multiple hospitals. The meeting quickly became frustrating. Everyone identified problems. Nobody presented practical solutions. The same concerns kept circulating. The same obstacles kept returning. Finally, a senior executive asked a simple question. "What are we missing?" The room became quiet. Julie studied the data on her screen. She had been reviewing the issue for days. A pattern stood out immediately. The shortage itself wasn't the biggest problem. The routing process was. Julie raised her hand. Several people turned toward her. She shared her screen. Then she walked everyone through her analysis. She pointed to delivery patterns, distribution delays, inventory bottlenecks, communication breakdowns. Within minutes, the entire discussion changed. People stopped debating. People started listening. Julie explained how supplies could move faster, how hospitals could receive inventory sooner, how delays could be reduced. The recommendations were practical, specific, measurable. Most importantly, they worked. When she finished speaking, nobody rushed to answer. Several executives reviewed their notes. One manager shook his head. "We completely missed that." Another executive nodded. "She's right." The meeting continued, but the attention remained on Julie's recommendations. By the end, several departments agreed to test her approach. Julie closed her laptop and returned to work. She didn't think much about it. That was her normal routine. Solve the problem. Move forward. A few days later, another meeting invitation appeared. This one specifically requested her participation. Then another invitation arrived. Then another. Julie started noticing a pattern. People wanted her opinion. People wanted her analysis. People wanted her solutions. For the first time in years, her work was becoming visible. The following week brought another important meeting. This time, senior leadership attended. The discussion focused on operational improvements. Julie expected to listen quietly. Instead, questions kept coming her way. Every answer led to another discussion. Every discussion led to another solution. By the end of the meeting, one executive spoke directly to her. "You've been doing this level of work for how long?" Julie smiled. "A while." The executive laughed. "A while is not an answer." Julie laughed softly. The truth was simple. She had been doing this work for years. Nobody asked before. That afternoon, she received several messages thanking her for her contributions. The recognition felt unfamiliar, not because she lacked confidence, because she spent so many years focusing on Darren's problems that she rarely thought about her own strengths. For the first time in a very long time, people were paying attention to what Julie could do, not what she could sacrifice, not what she could give away, what she could build. That distinction mattered. A lot. Over the following weeks, more leaders began seeking her input. Projects improved, systems improved, results improved. The reputation she quietly earned over years of hard work was finally reaching the people who mattered. Meanwhile, Darren remained completely unaware. He still viewed Julie through the same narrow lens, the dependable wife, the problem solver, the person who would always carry the load. He never noticed that other people were beginning to see something much bigger. They saw intelligence, leadership, vision, potential, qualities Darren overlooked for years. And that recognition was about to open a door Julie never expected. A door that would force her to start thinking about her own future instead of Darren's. The attention Julie received at work didn't disappear after that meeting. It grew. Every week brought new requests, new projects, new opportunities. People who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted her opinion. They wanted solutions. They wanted insight. They wanted results. Julie gave them exactly that. One morning she received an email asking her to attend a strategy meeting involving several regional healthcare facilities. She joined expecting another routine discussion. The meeting quickly became something else. Executives reviewed reports showing supply delays across multiple states. The same problems kept appearing: inventory shortages, slow deliveries, poor communication between facilities. Everyone agreed improvements were necessary. Nobody agreed on how to achieve them. Julie listened carefully. When her turn came, she shared several ideas she had been developing privately for years. A smarter forecasting system, better inventory visibility, faster emergency distribution, more efficient routing methods. As she explained each concept, the room became increasingly engaged. Questions came rapidly. Julie answered every one. The discussion lasted much longer than expected. After the meeting ended, she returned to work. Several hours later, another email arrived. This one came from Naomi Cross. Naomi asked if Julie had time for a conversation. Julie accepted immediately. Later that afternoon, they met. Naomi got straight to the point. "Where did those ideas come from?" Julie smiled. "I've been thinking about them for years." Naomi looked surprised. "Years?" Julie nodded. "I kept seeing the same problems." "And you've already built solutions?" "Most of them." Naomi leaned back. For several seconds she reviewed her notes. Then she looked directly at Julie. "You've been sitting on valuable ideas." Julie laughed. "I've been busy." The answer sounded simple. Both women understood what it really meant. For years, Julie focused on survival. Her own ambitions always came last. Her own goals always waited. Her own future always took second place. Naomi recognized that immediately. "Julie, when was the last time you worked towards something for yourself?" The question caught her off guard, because she didn't have an answer, not a recent one. Almost every major decision she made over the past 6 years revolved around helping Darren, helping with debt, helping with expenses, helping with emergencies, helping with promises that never became reality. Naomi continued, "You have leadership skills." Julie remained quiet. "You understand systems." Naomi pointed toward a report. "You understand operations." Then she pointed toward another report. "You understand people." Julie listened carefully. Nobody had ever described her that way before. Not because those qualities weren't there, because she never stopped long enough to see them. Naomi smiled. "I think you're capable of much more than you realize." Those words followed Julie home. They stayed with her during dinner. They stayed with her during work. They stayed with her while reviewing documents later that night. For years, she measured her value through sacrifice. Now someone was measuring her value through ability. The difference was enormous. Over the next several weeks, Naomi encouraged Julie to expand her ideas. Not casually, seriously. Julie started spending evenings developing a complete healthcare logistics model, a system capable of improving supply movement across large regions. The project excited her immediately, not because someone assigned it, because it belonged to her. Every improvement reflected her experience. Every solution reflected problems she had personally solved. Every feature reflected years of observation. For the first time in a very long time, Julie felt genuine excitement about the future. The feeling surprised her. She had become so accustomed to carrying burdens that she almost forgot what hope felt like. Each day brought progress. Each week brought new improvements. The project continued growing. The more Julie worked on it, the more confident she became. Meanwhile, something else was happening. She stopped thinking about Darren every minute. Not because the investigation ended. The evidence continued growing. The case continued growing. The truth continued emerging. But another part of her life was finally growing too. Her future, her identity, her confidence. For years, Julie believed her purpose was helping someone else succeed. Now she was beginning to imagine something different. What if she invested that same effort into herself? The answer became clearer every day. One evening, Naomi reviewed the latest version of Julie's system. When the discussion ended, Naomi smiled. This could become something significant. Julie looked at the screen. For the first time, she believed it. Not because someone was encouraging her, because the work itself was strong. The results were strong. The potential was strong. Years of overlooked talent were finally finding room to grow. Julie left work that evening with a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Optimism, not about Darren, not about debt, not about fixing another crisis. Optimism about her own future. And while Julie was finally beginning to see her value, Darren was starting to notice something he couldn't explain. The woman he depended on was changing, and he had no idea why. The changes started small enough that Darren couldn't immediately identify them, but he noticed them. For years, Julie had been predictable. Whenever he had a problem, she listened. Whenever he needed help, she responded. Whenever he needed reassurance, she gave it. That pattern was disappearing. Darren felt it before he understood it. One evening he walked into the house carrying takeout food. Normally Julie would ask about his day. Normally she would ask about meetings. Normally she would ask about business plans. This time, she didn't. She sat at the kitchen table, reviewing work documents. Focused, busy, engaged. Darren placed the food on the counter. "You working again?" Julie looked up. "Just finishing something." "You're always working." Julie smiled politely. "So are you." The answer sounded harmless. Something about it bothered him. The conversation ended there. No discussion, no follow-up questions, no interest in whatever story he planned to tell. Over the next several days, similar moments kept happening. Darren would talk about future opportunities. Julie would simply nod. Darren would mention investors. Julie would simply listen. Darren would describe another business plan. Julie would return to her work. The reactions felt different. For years she participated in those conversations. Now she observed them. The change unsettled him. A week later, Darren sat beside Julie in the living room. "Everything okay?" Julie looked up from her laptop. "Of course." "You've seemed distant lately." Julie closed the laptop. "I'm just busy." Darren studied her face. The answer sounded familiar. It was the same answer Julie had given everyone else for years. Now she was giving it to him. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The following weekend, Darren suggested dinner. Julie agreed. The evening remained pleasant. Normal conversation, normal interaction. But something important was missing. Darren kept waiting for Julie to bring up his business. She never did. He kept waiting for questions. None came. He kept waiting for concern. It never appeared. For the first time in years, Julie wasn't carrying responsibility for his future. She was focused on her own. Meanwhile, her work continued gaining attention. More meetings, more projects, more recognition. The momentum kept growing. Julie spent her energy developing ideas instead of solving Darren's problems. The difference transformed her. She looked more confident, more focused, more independent. Even Rochelle noticed. During a family dinner, Rochelle watched Julie describe one of her recent projects. The excitement in Julie's voice stood out immediately. After years of hearing conversations dominated by debt and stress, this felt different. Much different. When dinner ended, Rochelle pulled Julie aside. "You seem happier." Julie smiled. "I think I am." "Good." Julie nodded. For once, she agreed without hesitation, because the statement was true. Not perfectly happy, not completely healed, but moving forward. That progress mattered. While Julie moved forward, Darren continued moving in circles. The gap between them widened every day. He could feel it. He simply couldn't explain it. One evening, he returned home earlier than expected. Julie was sitting at the dining table surrounded by work materials. Charts, reports, research, project notes. Darren looked surprised. "What is all this?" Julie smiled. "A project." "What kind of project?" "A big one." Darren waited for more details. Julie returned to her work. The conversation ended. The reaction caught him off guard. For years, Julie shared everything. Now, she shared very little. Not because she was hiding something, because she no longer needed his approval. That was new, very new. As weeks passed, the pattern continued. Darren talked. Julie listened. Darren promised. Julie observed. Darren described future success. Julie focused on real progress. The contrast grew stronger every day. At the same time, the evidence against Darren continued growing quietly. Lorraine continued reviewing records. Sydney continued providing information. Charisma continued providing information. Julie continued documenting everything. Darren remained completely unaware. He still believed he controlled the story. He still believed Julie trusted him. He still believed the future would unfold exactly as he planned. He was wrong. One night, he sat across from Julie during dinner. The house felt different. The marriage felt different. The woman sitting across from him felt different. Finally, he asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. "What's changed?" Julie looked directly at him. Then she smiled. "Maybe I'm finally paying attention to myself." The answer stayed with Darren long after dinner ended. Because for the first time in years, Julie wasn't building her life around him. She was building it around herself. And while Darren struggled to understand what was happening, forces were already moving around him that he could no longer control. The evidence was growing. The truth was growing. The consequences were growing. Darren simply hadn't seen them yet. 3 weeks after Darren asked what had changed, he got his answer. The answer arrived in a large envelope. He found it on the dining room table when he came home that Thursday evening. At first he assumed it was another business document. Then he noticed his name printed across the front. He opened it casually. Seconds later, his expression changed. Divorce papers. He stared at them, then flipped through the pages again. Surely there had to be some mistake. There wasn't. The documents were real, detailed, official, prepared carefully. For several moments, he stood frozen. Then he laughed, not because he found anything amusing, because he genuinely believed Julie would never leave. For years she stayed through every problem, every excuse, every promise, every crisis. Darren convinced himself this situation would be no different. He grabbed his phone and called her immediately. Julie answered. "Hello? What is this?" "You've already read it." "You're serious?" "Yes." Darren walked across the room. "This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense. We need to talk." "We've talked for years." The answer hit harder than he expected. For the first time, Julie sounded completely different. No frustration, no anger, no pleading, no emotion he could work with, only certainty. Darren tried again. "Whatever this is, we can fix it." Julie answered immediately. "No." Silence filled his end of the call. Julie continued. "If you have questions, your attorney can contact mine." Then she ended the conversation. Darren stared at his phone. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet it unsettled him more than any argument they had ever shared. Because he finally understood something. Julie was done. Not upset. Done. Over the following days, he tried every approach he knew. Apologies, promises, explanations. Nothing worked. Julie remained polite, professional, distant. Every discussion passed through legal channels. Every request received the same response. "Speak to the attorneys." Darren quickly realized something else. Julie wasn't guessing anymore. She knew things, specific things. That became obvious during the legal process. Financial records surfaced. Account histories surfaced. Transfer records surfaced. Credit information surfaced. Questions appeared that Darren couldn't answer comfortably. Each document narrowed his options. Each record removed another excuse. Each fact weakened another story. For years he controlled conversations. Now, conversations revolved around evidence. Evidence never cared how persuasive he sounded. The pressure increased every week. Lorraine continued presenting documentation. Julie continued providing records. The timeline became impossible to ignore. Years of hidden financial activity sat in organized files. Every transaction had a date. Every date had documentation. Every document created another problem. The process moved forward steadily, Darren stopped laughing. He stopped calling the divorce ridiculous. He stopped assuming Julie would change her mind. Reality finally arrived. The woman he called his personal slave was walking away. And for the first time in years, she was taking control of her own future. The divorce process moved forward. So did the consequences. For years, Darren survived by controlling information. He told one story to Julie, another story to Sydney, another story to Charisma, different versions for different audiences. The system worked because nobody compared facts. Now the facts were together, and facts were winning. Every week brought new pressure. Questions started appearing from people Darren never expected. Business contacts became less responsive. Phone calls took longer to return. Meetings became harder to arrange. The confidence he once carried began fading. People who trusted his words were now asking for proof. Proof was something Darren struggled to provide. The legal process kept exposing more details. Account histories, financial transfers, credit activity. The picture became increasingly difficult to defend. Lorraine remained methodical. Every document had a purpose. Every record had a place. Every fact strengthened Julie's position. Darren tried explaining things. The explanations sounded weaker each time, because explanations could not erase paperwork. The documents already existed. The records already existed. The timelines already existed. One afternoon, he sat across from legal representatives reviewing financial activity. Questions came quickly. Specific dates, specific accounts, specific transactions. For years, Darren excelled at broad conversations, general promises, future plans, optimistic projections. This situation was different. Specific questions demanded specific answers. Those answers rarely helped him. The pressure followed him everywhere. Business conversations changed. Professional relationships changed. Personal relationships changed. Trust disappeared one piece at a time. Meanwhile, Sydney wanted nothing more to do with him. The sympathy she once felt was gone. The version of Darren she believed never existed. The businessman trapped in an unhappy marriage was a fabrication. The man she actually discovered was someone else entirely. Charisma reached the same conclusion. The promises, the investment discussions, the future plans, everything looked different once the truth surfaced. Neither woman argued with Julie. Neither woman blamed Julie. Both understood they had been deceived. That reality left Darren increasingly isolated. For years, he managed multiple relationships by keeping people separated. Now the separation was gone. The stories collided. The contradictions became obvious. The image he spent years creating began falling apart. At home, the situation felt no better. Julie no longer debated with him, no longer defended him, no longer tried to solve problems for him. The person who carried his burdens for years was gone. The woman still standing there looked familiar, but she was different, confident, focused, certain. Darren noticed it every time they interacted. The change frustrated him, because he couldn't reverse it. Every strategy that once worked had lost its power. Promises no longer worked. Apologies no longer worked. Excuses no longer worked. The truth had removed too many options. Months earlier, Darren believed he controlled everything. Now events moved without him. The legal process continued. The evidence continued. The consequences continued. Nothing stopped. One evening he sat alone reviewing the reality of his situation. The marriage was ending. Relationships were ending. Credibility was disappearing. The future he imagined was slipping away. For the first time, Darren faced something he had avoided for years. Accountability. Nobody was stepping in to absorb the damage. Nobody was working extra hours to fix the problem. Nobody was sacrificing their peace to protect him. Julie spent 6 years carrying responsibilities that never belonged to her. Now Darren was finally carrying the consequences that belonged to him. The difference was enormous. As his world continued shrinking, Julie's world continued expanding. The contrast became impossible to ignore. One life was built on deception. The other was built on effort. One was collapsing. The other was preparing for its greatest opportunity. And that opportunity was much closer than Julie realized. While Darren struggled with the consequences of his choices, Julie focused on the future. The healthcare logistics project continued growing. What started as a collection of ideas had become something much larger. Hospitals were paying attention. Executives were paying attention. Decision-makers were paying attention. The system Julie created was producing results. Supply delays dropped. Inventory visibility improved. Emergency deliveries moved faster. The numbers kept proving the same thing. The model worked. One morning, Julie received an invitation to present the project to a group of investors and healthcare leaders. This was the opportunity Naomi had been preparing her for. Years earlier, Julie would have doubted herself. Not anymore. She spent days preparing. Every detail mattered. Every number mattered. Every recommendation needed to be supported by results. When presentation day arrived, Julie entered the conference room with confidence. She recognized how much had changed. Not long ago, she spent every free moment worrying about Darren's problems. Now she was standing in a room where people wanted to hear her ideas. The meeting began. Julie walked everyone through the system: supply forecasting, inventory management, emergency distribution, operational efficiency, cost reduction, hospital performance. The discussion lasted nearly an hour. Questions came from every direction. Julie answered each one clearly. Years of experience gave her an advantage. She understood the problems because she had spent years solving them. By the time the presentation ended, the atmosphere in the room had changed. People were no longer evaluating the idea. They were discussing implementation, expansion, partnerships, investment. Julie left the meeting feeling hopeful. Several weeks passed. More meetings followed. More reviews followed. More negotiations followed. The project kept gaining momentum. Julie stayed focused. She refused to celebrate too early. She wanted signed agreements, not promises. She had learned that lesson the hard way. One afternoon, Naomi called her into the office. The moment Julie entered, she noticed the smile. Something was different, very different. Naomi slid a folder across the desk. Julie opened it. The first page immediately caught her attention. She looked at the numbers, then looked again. Her heart started racing. The proposed partnership exceeded $1 million. Julie stared at the agreement. For several seconds, she couldn't believe what she was reading. Years of work, years of experience, years of solving problems. Everything had led to this moment. Naomi smiled. "You earned every dollar." Julie looked down at the paperwork again. The emotion hit harder than she expected, not because of the money, because of what it represented. For years she believed her value existed only in what she could sacrifice. Now she was being rewarded for what she could create. The difference changed everything. The agreement moved forward. The signatures were completed. The partnership became official. Julie walked out of the building, carrying something she hadn't felt in years. Pride, real pride. That evening, she drove directly to her parents' house. Yvette opened the door and immediately noticed the smile. "What happened?" Julie laughed. "Good news." Everyone gathered around the dining table. Calvin listened carefully as Julie explained the partnership, the project, the agreement, the opportunity. When she finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then Calvin smiled, a proud smile, the kind only a father could give. "I knew you had it in you." Julie smiled. "So did I." For the first time in years, those words felt true. Rochelle stood and hugged her. Yvette hugged her next. The celebration wasn't about money. It was about freedom. Freedom from carrying someone else's mistakes. Freedom from fixing someone else's problems. Freedom from living inside someone else's story. Weeks later, Julie sat on her patio with a cup of coffee. The divorce was behind her. The investigation was behind her. The lies were behind her. For the first time in a long time, peace felt normal. Children played in nearby yards. Neighbors walked down the street. The morning felt simple, and that simplicity felt priceless. Julie thought about the woman she used to be. The woman who believed loyalty meant endless sacrifice. The woman who believed love meant carrying every burden. The woman who worked herself into exhaustion trying to save someone who never intended to save himself. That woman had learned a difficult lesson. Loyalty is powerful. Love is powerful. Commitment is powerful. But none of them should require a person to abandon their own worth. Julie gave Darren 6 years. She gave him trust. She gave him effort. She gave him support. He saw those gifts as something to exploit. That was his mistake, because every skill he took for granted eventually became the foundation of her success. The discipline, the resilience, the work ethic, the determination, those qualities never belonged to Darren. They belonged to Julie. They always had. Darren believed he had found someone he could use. What he actually found was a woman strong enough to rebuild her life. When the truth finally appeared, the marriage ended. The lies ended. The manipulation ended. But Julie's story did not end there. It became something better. A future built on truth. A future built on self-respect. A future built on her own value. And that future turned out to be worth far more than anything Darren ever took from her. If Julie's journey taught you anything, remember this: loyalty should never require you to lose yourself. Supporting someone you love is admirable. Sacrificing your self-respect is not. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to Will and Rise Stories for more powerful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances.